Got it.
Excellent.
That was my best shame, that was. Cool. Okay, shall I get stuck in?
Yes, please.
Right, okay. So Bob asked me to talk about Voyager, and I offered to talk about Voyager probably about a year ago and have never quite got around to it. Voyager, if you can see that screen, is a piece of software from a chap called Leonardo Arazzi, who operates under the trade name of Starkeeper.
Mike, you got full screen mode?
No, you're right. I can do that. It's just I'll need that screen later.
Oh, okay.
And when I go full screen, it opens the second screen, which means I can't see what everyone else is talking about. The point of Voyager is it's a full observatory or a full system automation tool intended to get the most out of automating your end-to-end image acquisition across one or more telescopes and one or more cameras. So on the screen there, you can see that with Voyager will take plugins, well, whoopee, but the key things is things like the array version and its integration with a product called Viking, which is a sort of franchise Switch product that they sell and integrate and embed the APIs for. So I put together a couple of slides. Most of this is just about prompting to go into the sort of quick demos of things. But the key features of Voyager is that end-to-end automation of astro imaging and the full range of observatory components, both manually and also a range or set of options for ways of doing the automation for different processes throughout the night. So you can do repeated sequences, which you might do in surveys by repeatedly seeing the same galaxies night after night, taking images of each and then doing blink comparisons. Or you can also use the same sort of mode for creating your mosaics. It goes into full unattended setup via a concept called drag scripts, which those who saw Nina the other week will now be familiar with. It's got integration and dependencies. So, PhD does a good job of guiding. So why would you nowadays develop your own guiding capability? There's planetarium software out there. So why would you repeat developing your own planetarium if you can hook into the existing ones? I've talked about the Viking switch and sensing peripherals. But one of the nice key features is its web control interface. So, typically we might sit down during the night and remote desktop into the observatory if that's what you've got, or remote desktop into the laptop that's controlling your telescope out on the patio. Voyager has its own web interface that basically tells you most of what's going on, including showing you the latest pictures and some stats about those pictures. And I'll give that a quick flick through too. And then it goes into the support of what I'm calling the professional and amateur harder science requirements. So the telescope array concept is the reason I bought this thing, or at least invested into this thing, because you never end up buying it, do you? One of the key features is that you can control up to 4 cameras, all slaved on the one scope, and all the image acquisitions on those cameras are slaved and mastered through the master controller, which manages their sequence, their cameras, their filters, does things like all the covers and flat fielding at the end of the night. There's an API for running across multiple installations, so you can run up to 4 lots of 4 mounts, 4 mounts, each with up to 4 cameras on. And I'm sure there's much wider setups out there. So, for example, the Dragonfly setup, while not using Voyager, there's similar ones within the Voyager user groups that use up to 20 or 30 cameras and 3 or 4 different mounts all at the same time doing the same sort of thing. And you'll notice also starting to do things like remote operation and access support. So if you wanted to set yourself up as a pay-per-view, pay-per-use type situation accessed over the web, actually that's largely built in. You just have to enable it. And then finally, the most valuable thing, I think, which I'm only starting to get my head around, and beginning to use is the automated scheduler. And the scheduling of objects has been around in a couple of products for quite a while, but it's never really gone mainstream because it's quite a sophisticated thing to do, and it needs to talk to a lot of equipment. And now Voyager sort of built that in, and at the moment this year they're in a program of getting it from beta into the full-blown thing. And the way they're doing that is by essentially crowdsourcing the investment, and then you get free licensing from then onwards. And then finally, the licensing is by scaling. So you can buy Voyager moderately cheaply, £100 or so for a basic capability. The advanced, which includes the full-blown scheduler, costs something like 300. And the difference between normal array is a sort of incremental top-up, and then you get support every year based on a small fee, small subscription fee. So what does it look like? It looks like this, and I'll jump into a live thing in a moment. So as you might imagine, it consists of a range of setup of things, and on the picture you can see pretty much all the objects that you want to manage in terms of managing your telescope and its supporting services. So a camera and a filter wheel, mount, the guiding mechanism, which could be the sky, or it could be Maxim, or it could be PhD. The planetarium, which is typically Carte de Ciel, Stellarium, or again the sky. Plate solves, there's 4 or 5 different solutions that it talks to from plate solving. Autofocus, it says it's got AI about autofocus, and it does focus where it is, or it does what it's called Robo star, which means it goes off and looks at another star based on some criteria. You tell it, and then focuses, and it comes back, and then peaks up, and then carries on where it's left off. The rotator, the flats, device says, so it, oops, right, all the time. Flat devices, it handles a minimum of 2 at a time because it assumes that you're going to use one for the guide camera and one for the main camera, or one for the main camera plus one to control the light device. One for there's an interface to the dome, as you might imagine. There are numerous things about observing conditions and controlling your peripherals. And that's where, the Voyager USP is coming in. It's about reliably obtaining data night after night, and you can just leave the thing running. At the end of the night, it puts itself away, and at the next time astronomical twilight starts, it'll open itself up and carry on where it left off. I'm not saying I've got to that point yet, because I've been slowly working through all the hardware issues that support the unreliability issues that you get to that point. And then finally, remote is all about the web dashboard and the pay-per-view and how you access this. So I shall try to work out, hopefully, you should now be able to see my remote desktop and the password, which is all dots.
Yeah, how many dots? I was trying to copy that. How many dots?
Lots of dots, just too many, and
okay.
some really alphanumeric dots as well. Okay, so Voyager is all about the setup. Oh, I'm sure I rearranged this. Where are we? That's because I'm not looking at the right window. So come on. If I do that, can you still see my screen?
We see you.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So that means that Zoom's clever enough to work across remote desktop. Okay. So what we've got is we've got the setup forms. Sorry. Everyone good?
We can see. Hang on. It's the all sky
Yeah.
screen.
Oh, really? Okay. Let me.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I could see. Sorry, yeah.
Right. Let me sort that out. Does that help? You should now see Voyager.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Right. So what we've got here is just the basic set of steps you go through to get Voyager set up. And as you might imagine, I can't see this differs a lot from SG Pro or CCD to CL or Nina. You've got to go through all your bits and pieces and configure them. There's quite a range. You can do either native drivers, which they've built in the native underlying APIs, such as the ZWOs and the ATICs and some of the QHYs and a few others, or you can go via third parties like Maxim and the Sky and of course ASCOM, and there is a degree of indie support, but I'm not seeing it there. So please feel free to shout if there's something you want to see, whether it supports X or Y or Z, and we can take a look, because it's not going to be terribly interesting going through all of these. Guiding, as you might imagine, is a combination of Maxim, PhD, or the Sky, and you can do a lot about setting up some basic settings about what resolution and talking to the guider and what to do in failure modes, but only the sort of thing you'd expect to see. So the thing about Voyagers, in trying to be hugely reliable and automate the whole process, is it tries to be intelligent on things like the plate solving. So you can set it to try and plate solve 3 times before it goes back to blind plate solve mode. And you can also pick a selection of plate solvers for which to fail through. So I start off with all Sky because it feels to be quicker most of the time, but ASTAP is much better. So I feel about doing a blind solve if it gets totally lost and can't find where it is. And I can specify the default filters, and I can specify a minimum search radius and how long to wait before we decide we can't do that. And if you want, you can then fail back ultimately to Nova astrometry, which I think we might all agree hardly ever fails to do a blind solve. But the problem is it can take up to 10 minutes to do so, because a lot of people use it nowadays. But we can also make use of Pinpoint LE, for example, if you're already a Maxim user, or Pinpoint. Where else are we looking at on this? Autofocus, it has a degree of setup, just as you might imagine. It goes through the V curve with you. With Voyager, the key thing is about, it'll ask you the normal things like your resolution of your stepper motor or your focus motor, and what sort of star sizes you're anticipating seeing, so it knows what the definition of good is. But then what it'll do is it'll say, right, given that you're using a filter, what sort of brightness of star can you get in a period of time that gives me a good half flux diameter for your images? And then it'll come up and say, right, well, if you want me to focus, I need to move off to this star over here. Focus on that star. I'll find it with a quite a wide resolution. If needs be, I'll plate solve and then refind it and home in on it, such as the image. Then it'll take the images, it'll do a complete V, and then it'll double check the V, and then it'll use that V from then until something really badly goes wrong, such as your stepper motor slips. And it's pretty bang on, actually, quite reliable. But that V is also used, if you want to, you can do a complete field. So instead of moving off, once you've got your initial V, you can then just image the field and then pick all the stars in the field. And you don't have to do that, clearly, it does that for you. And it'll do a half flux diameter measurement, and then it'll just focus until they, the part of the field you're interested in falls within your half flux diameter criteria, which for me is typically about 4 arc seconds, I think, per star. And just for it to even get out of bed, it typically needs you to be less than 10 arc seconds per star. So in other words, you need to have manually focused at the start so it knows where to start off. But once it's done the V, it doesn't care. It'll get struck in and do it every time, unless you move to a place where there really are no stars. So that's what the V curve first light wizard is. It's about setting up your V curve. And in order to get to your V curve, you would use the point closest star. And point closest star, as I just said, is about telling it to go off and find a couple of candidate stars to focus on, and then it'll go away and do that. And then if you want to add new V curves, you can. So in other words, you can refine your V curves by overlaying a set of them. And then if you want to do some tests, you can do some tests later on. But it's what's quite handy is the whole number of ways of triggering the focusing, and I'll come into that later because it's quite rich. I don't want to spend too long on this section because it could be quite detailed and boring. Is there anything that people want to particularly see in componentry or interfaces for the devices you might use? Or shall I take science to plow on?
I think just plow on, Mike. It's all interesting.
Sorry, just lubricating there. What is nice is that using ASCOM means I can hook in all my alpaca stuff. So my dome's alpaca and it's all plugged in here, and it gets dynamically discovered. And if you've got a roll-off roof, works quite happily with a roll-off roof. You do the normal sort of things you would do with an ASCOM dome by specifying your settings, the things you'd recognize when you've got a dome. What is tricky was this figure needs to be somewhere in the 5 to 10 seconds for my dome. Otherwise, it thinks it's already completed the command and then sometimes tends to take the plate solve the image of the inside of the dome, which is no use to anyone. So because the dome's still moving at that point. But coming back to where I talked about earlier, which is the key things about automation, is about the interfaces to the weather. So it talks about you can access CloudWatcher or Boltwood directly through file interfaces if you've got one of them, or you can use the ASCOM observing conditions, which you've got multiple ways of being fed in from multiple sources. And you can do, what it does is inject all of those things into your image. So you've got a really good idea of what conditions your image was acquired under. And then you've also got your SQM. I'm not quite sure why I care so much about the SQM, but it's just nice to have a complete view. But most importantly, the safety monitor. And this is the thing that I've most recently been working on getting right. For those familiar with ASCOM, the purpose of the safety monitor is to provide a flag to say, we've got a problem. And that problem may be sourced from lots of different reasons. It may be a dome and a physical problem, such as a power supply failure, or it may be just something more like it's raining, you better close things up. And Voyager's got a mode whereby it just suspends the lot, takes an set of actions on that suspension that you can tell it what those actions are. And then we'll check periodically when I'm saying, please check every 30 seconds and don't respond within 30 seconds because that would be too quick. And then decide to do something, or just wait until the end of astronomical darkness and then close up and then wait for the next night. So that's pretty fundamental to the way that operates, and that's the bit I've got working just about now. So I'll hope to be able to show you that just shortly. Viking, I've got no connection with Viking, but they seem to be moderately reliable input and output cards, including DACs and PWMs and the sort of stuff I tend to build myself, I think, and indeed have. But Voyager setup is about, well, how do you want to show things so you can twiddle things? A little personal thing is that I use a red screen by using a red gel filter over the front, which means the color palette that Voyager wants to use is absolutely no use because you can't see it through a red screen and there's no way of changing it. So that's a little bit of a problem, but that's only a problem if you're actually using the screen that Voyager's running on as opposed to remote desktoping in. So I turn on the web dashboard, I tell it what port I need to access it from, I create some users, and common is about, well, how do you want to authenticate? What are your secrets? And do you want it to start the web server at startup, and do you want to start the application server? And the application server is the API interface. So yeah, hopefully this is pretty much standard because it's the sort of thing that all our tools are doing. But the place you end up with is this once you're up and running. And what I'll do is I'll just run drag it to turn everything on. So I've taken one of their basic scripts. I'm leaping ahead with drag scripts, but hopefully you'll see what's going on. So the drag scripts are the means by which things get automated. And I was quite taken when we looked at Nina the other week, how similar they were actually. But I think drag scripts got a couple more years on Nina, but that's not to say Nina won't rapidly catch up in terms of range of capabilities and blocks and the ability to do jumps and variables and things like that. It's quite fine grained. So what's going on at the moment is that Voyager is connecting the safety monitor first, so it knows whether it's safe to, even proceed. And then there's there's the telescope coming alive and the power turning on, and the sensors coming online and the camera's turning on, and it's doing a basic slew to an initial position to allow me to do my first plate solve of the night and do a fine solve of where I'm pointing. And you can see at the bottom there in orange, well, it might be difficult to see at the bottom there in orange, but please believe me, that this thing is here. Voyager's checked the safety monitor, which happens to be a bit of a script in Node-RED. And the safety monitor said, look, it's not raining, it's not excessively windy. By and large, I don't care what time of day, at night it is, and the sun's not in my face, therefore it's safe to open. At some point, it should be a bit more complex and start looking at the power supplies and whether switches are returning answers and whether the dome thinks it's open or closed or errored, but we haven't got there yet. So at the moment, the dome is now rotating to face south because its part position is the other way around due to the channels. And once that's complete, the telescope will move to face the shutters and the shutter will open, and it will then take an image and plate solve where it is.
Mike, have you got
What's really...
So just a quick question, Mike. So have you got any internal web cameras in the dome so you can keep an eye on?
I do. I might even come that one there. So bear with me 2 seconds. I'll turn it on, and with any luck, sometimes I need to try again. Ka-ching, ka-ching. No, it's not picked up the DNS fast enough. I'll give that another go. Right, where was I? This one. What happened then? I know what happened. Come on. Oh, that was loud. Sorry. There we go.
Oh, excellent.
So it's still daylight, so we can still see stuff. Oh, come on. So sadly, the magic is complete. What's happened is the dome has done a full 180 and the telescope's come awake, and I've forgotten to put the step ladder away, so I'm not doing anything more dangerous than slewing to looking at the south portal because it'll take the cameras off.
Good reason to have the webcam.
Sorry?
A very good reason to have the webcam.
Exactly that, yeah. So what's really cool is the webcam's Wi-Fi and it goes around with the dome. So what happens is the whole building appears to shift underneath you. It's very surreal. Right, where was I? So we'll see some more when I run the script to put it away, I guess. But what we got to is a position as if you look down the right-hand side, you can see two things. One is the status panel, which is this vertical panel here, and the other one is the command panel. Interestingly, the command panel is looking very quiet. What I would expect to see is that reflects these are all the devices that we've configured previously in the setup, and the fact that they're all green indicates that they're all connected and operating normally, and tells you what some of the version strings are. So you can see all of these are ASCOM Alpaca devices, and that's also running an ASCOM device, EQ ASCOM, so nothing special there. But I'm intrigued as to why that's not showing. Oh, there we go. Something clicked on there. So the mount's currently stopped, which is what you'd expect, I think. The camera's cooling, the guide scope is idle, and I can kick off to calibrate all from this command panel. You know, this is the bit about doing those commands, and this is the bit about reading the status back. So down the bottom, I've got the full set of weather. I've got my status tracking that will show things like the typical curve for progress through a sequence, and this will show for a given target where I am on my meridian flip progress throughout the night. This will give me the guiding graph that you'd normally expect to see in PhD. I don't know what it looked like for if you're using Maxim or the Sky, but I'd hope that it exports and graphs it in a recognizable format. Your CCD status and your telescope status, and a bit about your autofocus status, but my autofocus isn't attached to this particular camera. So what we've got here is we've had a look at the setup and the range of devices and which bits it thinks are important. What we've done is we've done some connections and shown this thing connecting and how these things come alive as it connects. And then in Voyager, we then start moving towards the full automation. So the next step is having configured and then connected. The next step is to say, right, well, what are the activities I need to do and how do I prove them? And Voyager's built around things called sequences, and it gets its information as to where it's going by using both the planetarium and by direct lookup of Sesame and looking up its internal database called Robo. So if I'm still looking up M65 or M66 as if I haven't previously prepared it, what it does is that button uses cart to CL, which happens to be running because it's one of my started things, which is opened in a different window, so you can't see it, but it's there honest. So in theory, it says, I know you want to look at M66 and I've returned the coordinates. Here's the coordinates. Those are places you need to go to. I'm not going to click on the go to button because it's not a safe place. But what you then do is you can click on go to and go to it and then plate solve. And so we've got blind solve, plate solve, and we've got precise pointing. And precise pointing is where you plate solve once, work out you're not quite there yet, and then continue plate solving until you hit it within a particular accuracy target, which typically bottoms out at I've seen in the forum a chap needed 1.5 arc-second accuracy because he was doing double star measurements and wanted to nail it every time. And I basically hit the mechanical limits of the amount at 1.5 arc-seconds, which is a fair investment, I think, both in mount and time. But there's no reason why anything else couldn't do that equally well. But it can also handling your rotator if you've got one fitted, by not only solving for the position and moving to that position, but also solving for that sky positioning angle on the sky, so that you can frame your picture the way you wanted to frame it. Clearly, you can take a camera shot and you can do some things. The gear cog things are all about where you can do some brief setup. So if I want to take a quick picture, it'll take one for 30 seconds here, and that will turn up in the viewer, which is that the one? Not that one. I don't use the viewer too often, to tell the truth. Come on. Oh, I know what's going on. It must be show status, show commands, web dashboard. There we go. Oh, look, and you can see that the target availability is filled in now. I've picked one and told it where to look. So the fits viewer is nothing terribly clever until you take a picture. So given where I'm currently looking, I could take a picture and off I go. And while that, yes, it shouldn't go anywhere. So it just does a check to make sure the dome's not moving, and then waits for a few seconds before, so it settles down after it completes moving. At the moment, the dome's not slaved because I haven't got an automation sequence running, but it's doing an acquisition at the moment. There we go. Still not doing anything in the background, which is good news. I should probably abort that actually. Oh, lovely noises. So the key, I guess, is the next thing to look at is things like sequences. So you know, the key thing between lots of different software is that just buying into their way of thinking about how to approach the problem. So SG Pro will have one way of doing it, Maxim will have another way, and the question is, you'll be familiar or comfortable with their thought approach. So Voyagers is all about sequences, and what you do is build a sequence by setting up an object, getting the coordinates from your favorite source, setting up your PA, and then telling it, just like any other application, what filters you want to use if you're a filtering person, and your exposure and your binning and so on and so forth. You can actually set the individual gains and offsets if you so want. And what this handy curve does is tell me the sequence of acquisitions and the rough length of time those acquisitions are. So red, luminosity, HA, blue, green, red, luminosity. And I'm repeating that section 4 times. And then I have a whole set of options about how I want to run that sequence. Like stop it if it drops below 20 degrees altitude. Stop it if it gets too high. I'm not quite sure there's a reason for that. You might want to constrain your hour angle around the meridian. You might want to constrain your azimuth because your dome can't rotate, or it's a roll-off roof, or so there's a whole heap of handy things like that, and you can run program scripts before you start and after you start if there's specific things you need to call out to. I guess the real value within Voyager that I'm finding is that I can set up every time. Well, I've got something I can do to manage my tracking and do something about where tracking fails, such that say my pointing is errored, then I can plate solve after every picture, which I don't think is anything special. Meridian flip is managed, again, nothing special. But guiding, I can cause it to rehash the guiding every image or every slot or after a period. The dithering is nothing special either, it just does it. But the focus gets interesting because I've got a lot of control about when I need to refocus. Do I want to refocus on a per image basis or a per slot, where a slot is, say, 5 L images, and then move on to my R's and my B's and my G's. Delta T is when the temperature changes, or when the altitude changes, or when you cross the meridian, or just every 20 minutes, because that's how you like to behave. And you can select which is your filter. I don't think that's particularly strange, but here's where you select whether you want to use Robo star, which moves it off to a star, takes some pictures, focuses up and moves back again, or the local field, which is about using the stars that are in your local field, and hopefully there's enough of them to make a meaningful result. And what to do when you have problems. Do you want me to do anything? I can do nothing, or I can say I can't recover from that, so I'll say goodnight and close down. And then what to do at the end, which is not vastly different, but slightly more structured and can run a few more scripts. And so you can have as many of these slots within a sequence as you want. So if I was picking a galaxy, I typically run 5 of each color and then rotate it maybe throughout the night, or maybe pick 4 rotations, which would give me probably about 2 hours worth of data, and that'd be more than sufficient for my sort of capacity. And then you hit save, and off you hit save, and then that sequence is saved for that target. And if you want to create some more sequences, feel free. But then it's as simple as just hitting that green button, and what you're doing is you're in a manually initiated sequence, and off it goes. Run sequence with start options allows me to turn some basic things off. So if I want to override the precise pointing to target at the start because it's already pointing, here's the place I might do it. I can turn it off for every sequence, or I can just manually override it at the start, which is a bit more flexible. And there's a tool called Donuts Calibration, which is a bit of a plugin that you pay extra for to do something about. Not quite sure what it does actually, but I suspect it's something to do with flat fielding. Precise pointing before first shot, guide calibration, initial focus. Yeah, nothing too strange there. And then there's a bunch of manual controls. So you can see this is all about getting your sequencing and what sequence does, and providing some of the manual activities around that, building up your automation process to a point where you're happy with it, you understand it. And you can force it to manually focus as well, and you can also cause it to manually meridian flip if you really want to. Where am I up to? And I use the go to alt-as feature to make sure it goes to the flat field target, which is a light I've got in the dome, at a known alt-as position, as long as the dome's in the right position. I can see that my camera has timed out. That probably means the fans got stuck. I might need to give it a prompt. You can see that the cooling temperature is interesting, something to do with attics. It's something like 3. It's like a white blue supergiant on the surface of that camera at the moment, at 340 times 10 to the 20 degrees or something silly. So there are still some bugs in here, except if I talk to Leonardo, he'll be very clear that they're not his bugs, they're the camera provider's bugs or the other vendor's bugs. Right, so moving on, this is about building confidence and building your ability to run the sequences, because the next thing that you can also do is build research surveys in survey mode. So as you might imagine, a survey is not a big difference from the ability to run multiple filters. So Voyager supports the idea of I'm going to run a sequence against multiple targets. And here I've had my sequence, which should look fairly familiar. It's LBGR, it's a certain number of length of time. And I'm saying I want one of each, please, just so I can build a color image with some luminosity. And then I'm going to run that same sequence against numerous galaxies, in this case, because it's a supernova survey. At these locations, if I want, I can specify some rotation. I can also change the order, or I can turn individual ones off. And Robo is a back-end database that I've imported data into. In this case, I've got hundreds of galaxies, half-inched from Telescopium through the CSV export and imported into here. As you can see, it tells you I can't pretend this was all manual work. And these are all galaxies in the, I think it's the first 400 in the NGC in a particular hour angle window. So spring galaxies are spring brighter than Mag 12. And the point would be I want to go through a section of them and night after night after night and just run a survey and let Voyager get on with it. And that's exactly what it's built to do. So having specified them up, I just basically click on one of them. I click to use a selected target, and actually that selected target should appear. Let's try another one, 3040A, use selected target. There's 3040A saved in there. It's added to the survey list, hit save, click on save, yes, hit OK. And then I've got 4 galaxies in here, and I would just basically click on that button and off it does. It starts running my script about working through all of those galaxies continuously. And you can say, well, how do you want to do one and then separate it in time, or do you want to do one after the other and only do a few number of runs, or do you just want to carry on regardless, so you can monitor them throughout the night, or throughout the year, in fact. Now, the problem with that is you have to know that that galaxy is available and makes sense in terms of altitude. And Voyager's basically capable at this level of saying, well, I can't see that one, so I'll ignore it. I'll move on to the next one. That's the exception criteria where we stood up before. But this is, the next step is where we get the value from. And that's, that's where the sequencer comes into its magical own. And I might be overblowing it here, but I think it's quite cool. but I've only just brought it into use, so it's something fairly new, and I haven't had the ability to use it yet, other than to set it up ready for some clear nights and to have the system ready to go. So the sequence is built around what it calls a target manager. I'll just bring that up. And as you might imagine, what we're doing is building a story on the sequences. We've had a basic sequence, we've had a survey sequence, and now the next situation is to have a, right, sod it, we're going to run the whole thing sequence. And so, I wish things would. What we've got is I've got an application. That application connects to whichever particular instance of Voyager you're interested at the time. So if I had a Paramount with 4 cameras on in Dome A, and another telescope in Dome B, I would use this to connect to the particular instance of Voyager I want through the setup I've got here. And Voyager operates in profiles. So when we saw those setups earlier, in terms of all the devices and the way they're configured, I could run the same. I could run a set of telescopes on a mount, and then swap them out and apply a different profile. So in other words, I could save the profile between setups. So I've got a profile for my RC 12-inch with reducer and without, and I've got a profile for the Vixen, the 8-inch, and I've got a profile for using the spectroscope on the 12-inch. It just allows me to just instantly swap between those different configuration sets. And if it's as simple as using different cameras at different plate scales, because they've got different pixel sizes, it makes it really easy. But what we've got is in this profile, which is what I'm currently set up for, I've got a basic acquisition script set up, which contains, if you remember, that sequence set says, well, how many do you want to take? How do you want to guide? How do you want to focus? That's a sequence template that says, for all these acquisitions in this family of acquisitions, I want you to use those methods in a templated format. But what do you want to take pictures of? Well, I want to take pictures of all the spring galaxies that I've added into my collection. And here you can see I've got 3 galaxies loaded into my collection. And what it does is it just gets on with the collection of data based around being called through a drag script. And I'll get into drag scripts in a minute. And you'll see how really easy it is, actually, I hope. But the point is that my spring galaxies collection, it's like fashion. I've got a whole bunch of dresses, and I'm going to set some constraints about when I can wear them, when I'm interested in doing them, how far away the moon needs to be before I want to take it, how far, whether the moon influences a particular filter, well, whether the seeing is good enough for me to carry on. That's what the HFD talks about. Whether I just want to take 2 hours and that's good enough, or if I just want as much data as possible. The natural sky, the background sky brightness might tell me that it's too bright to image because it's a low contrast image target. And whether there's a date window of relevance. So if I've got a list of galaxies for the year, for example, and this one's a spring galaxy, I might say, well, for this particular target, only between February and May. And the sequence will just work itself out. I could probably leave that empty and it would work itself out anyway. But excuse me, I can enable and disable, as you might imagine, so nothing too clever there. But what it then does is, in the course of the night, as soon as astronomical night hits, the telescope will wake up. It will turn the dome on. It will turn the telescope. It will blind solve. And then it'll say, right, what's my first target? Where are we up to? Which ones have you prioritized? Oh, you haven't prioritized any, so I'll treat them all and then just work my way through them based on their visibility throughout the night. So as soon as I hit some criteria such as you've got enough, move on, or it's now exceeding the hour angle, or it's now below an altitude, move on to the next. And what it then does is just track the progress through these individual trackers. I'm sorry, I haven't got the data to show that I'm part way through an acquisition on these, because what you'd expect to see is would have curves in half or when the data was acquired. and some basic stats about the quality of that data that then allows you to do some pre-filtering. And there's a sort of synopsis of what you've done recently, and clearly I haven't got any yet, but I might have a picture of someone else that did have some. And then this is what that summary looks like within your Voyager app. So having created them in the manager, you can also add them directly within Voyager, obviously, but having created them within the manager, you can then just track them through here. And what happens if I select, I haven't got any running targets, and that's fine. I can click on to start the Robo target manager from here. I can tell it to go off and run, and then I can just watch the magic happen and go to bed. And Voyager will either email me, or it'll send me a signal, or it'll send me an SMS, or it will do anything that you can initiate via some form of scripting, because it'll do any, it'll call a script based on one of those exception things. So what we've got now is we've got the capability of something looking after an optimized sequence of targets based on a list we've given it, and just let it get on with it and tell us when things are complete. And if we want to prioritize some targets on a daily basis over others, we can. But the problem is, right, well, we need a script to wrap around the entirety of that, which causes the dome to start up and then just sit there and monitor the sky until things are ready for it to do some observations. And that's what the drag script's all about. So I'm going to go back to Nina again, because I was quite taken with Nina, how close it was to this. What we've got in the drag script is a basic set of blocks, and I'll bring up the editor because then you can see what's going on a bit better in this interface. So here's the editor. Can I zoom in? No, I can't. I apologize if you can't see the detail on that, but I'll try and make it as good as I can. So it's a very drag and drop editor. So it's not trying to be too clever. You have a list of capabilities like you might remember from seeing in VB script editors in the past. I'm sure it's not far from that, to tell the truth. And what you do is in this case, I start the events, which are about safety and exception monitoring. And then at the start of a session, it does something about running the power on scripts. And then it connects the safety monitor, which says, well, we're not ready to connect. We're not ready to do anything yet because we're not in a safe position. And then it does something about connecting all those different services that comprise a working observatory and wraps it in a timeout. And if I have a timeout, then it generates an exception, which will drop through all here and then handle it. And, where am I up to? So this is okay, I've now connected successfully. So I'm going to do some pre-setup, which is the bit where the dome turns around, does some plate solving and starts tracking. And then the magic, actually this script only opens and starts up. So this is the script I use to open the dome to get to the point where we're currently at. So what I shall do is load the end-to-end script. And you can see it's not an awful lot more complex. It's actually the same blocks. I just chopped it out to get there. Magic line is this line here, and that's it. That's the magic line that calls the sequencer. It says, give me what you've got, Mr. Scheduler. I'll go and run them for you. So as long as I've put a bit of effort into making sure I'm happy that I'm set up and the sky's clear, all I have to do is call the sequencer. And then throughout the night, it'll carry on observing until the sequencer says, right, it's the end of astronomical dark, which is one of the ways I've configured it. In fact, it might be worth, there we go. There's my target. It says, I want you to work with default priorities, only during astronomical night, don't apply any offsets. It says the sequence should have a minimum of 15, but I would thought it'd be more like 60 to 2 hours. Only do it when the moon's at below a certain altitude. Handle some soft errors. and don't start sequences in the meridian zone, you know, when it's about to do a meridian flip. So nothing hard at all. So I'm looking forward to actually giving some really good thrashing and see how it goes, because this is one of the key reasons of buying Voyager in the first place. And then the rest is okay. At the end of the night, if we've got any errors or we have to suspend, it'll jump to the suspend handler, which will close things down and make things safe for a period of time. And if we happen to time out because astronomical night time ends, it will then close things down again, even further, right down to the base. And at the end of them, it'll wait there until that happens all over again at the start of the next astronomical night. So I'm looking forward to great things from that. I'll stop there for questions in case anyone's got any questions, or just to check everyone's alive still, because I can't see anything.
So I just come off mute to say yes, they're still here. It certainly looks very, very powerful, and obviously taking you a long time to understand it to get to this point. But yes, as Mike says, anybody got any questions so far? I can think of one that Dave ought to be asking. Will Dave, that is.
Oh, go on then.
Meridian flip, north or south?
Oh yeah, oh, yes, indeed. Does it cope with meridian flips below the pole?
I not heard of anyone that's doing that. That's not to say it can't. I've just got no evidence to say it can.
Yeah, because that's the thing. That's I discovered in doing these exoplanets. There's a few of them that you follow, and they swing. They're sort of circumpolar, and they swing round, and they start in the sort of northwest and finish in the northeast, and they're below the pole when he does it. And SG Pro doesn't cope with that at the moment, so it relies on the mount hitting the limits you've set limits you've set, and then flipping around itself. But of course, that then means it doesn't plate solve and put itself back in the right place afterwards. It's on their list, apparently.
I can imagine. It's an interesting one, that, because there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't expect a mount controller to be able to handle that. But as I say, I've not seen any evidence of anyone doing.
Yeah. So if you wanted an experiment, once you've got to grips, you know, with all the basics of it working and using your system, you might want to test that one.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I mean, the nearest I got was imaging the comet. A couple was it Neowise, because that was pretty close to north and passed under the
NCP. Yeah. Well, it's under the NCP.
Yeah, but I didn't try and track it through that with the big scope.
All right. Yeah.
I think I had a very narrow window where I could fit it, so I had to, whatever I did, I had to go to that window.
Yeah.
So where was he up to? So, you know, it's a series of layers, and it's taken some time because there are some interesting quirks. I talked earlier about this logging palette is pretty ugly when you're using a red filter across the top of it, because green just disappears under red. But this is the status windows are quite informative and helpful, and the command window gives you access to everything in one place without having to paginate or tab or whatever across different settings. And what's interesting is that, by and large, once you've hit the drag script to start, you just walk away and wonder what you're going to do with the rest of your night, which is, I guess, something that Dave and Nigel are quite familiar with already, but it's been a strange feeling for me getting to that point.
Yeah, just have to stockpile your Netflix account, you know.
Yeah, absolutely that. I guess the last two features to pull out are, I'm going to load up the shutdown dome script. But if we go back to the on-the-fly setting, is the auto flat. And I guess actually this is a question to the team here. Voyager takes a point of view that what you want to do is expose your flats to a particular ADU level. So in this case, you might be able to see that it says, I'm going to try and get to 20,000 ADU, which is a value I've set. But Voyager's point is it wants to try and get all the flats to have a median of 20,000 because that's what I've told it, instead of exposing all the flats to a particular time value and then accepting that some of them differ slightly because of natural differences and changing brightness and stuff. And that tends to cause me problems with Maxim. I guess my question is, when you process your flats and do your master and then apply your master to your images, do the tools you use care about brightness changes? Or do they care about time changes? And you know, in the same way that they might care about temperature changes between the different images. How important is that? Because I know Maxim doesn't like it if the time changes. It doesn't care about brightness at all.
So it shouldn't, in theory, matter at all. The software ought to be able to handle any of those changes. I think the only issue would be the flat, the dark frames you took for the flat. If you had lots of different exposure times for your flats, that would complicate that. But apart from that, yes, it really should handle all of that.
Well, I can imagine, for example, Cyril, which I've got a very much a little passing knowledge about. You just tell it, here's my bunch of flats, master them together and then use them. Does Cyril care? Does it bother to look how closely they are in ADUs, in temperature and in exposure time? Or does it say, no, you've told me this, I'm going to use them regardless?
So I would expect it to just use them, and it will end up analyzing each image to determine how to normalize them together. And it will use multiplication to normalize them. And because it's normalizing them, it doesn't matter if one frame is darker or brighter than the other. That will all be handled. And that way it can get rid of any outliers, which there shouldn't be that many of on a flat anyway.
Yeah, maybe just a quirk of Maxim I've got used to in that case. But so Voyager's approach is to say, right, I'll run this on your behalf. I'll normalize them. I'll manage the exposure so that we get within whatever percentage points of the target ADU you want. You can give me a help if you like by telling me what your minimum max probably ought to be in, and I'll go away and do that for you. And then you just kick that off as part of your sequence at the start or the end of the night. And it's clever. It's got enough latitude that you can say, well, I need you to use my manual panel and I'll run some scripts about starting it and stopping it. Or you can use the Sky, or you can use a specific device. So one of the cover calibrator ASCOM devices is one of the things I've got that, so it's moderately flexible in that regard. Or a flip cover would do the same job, and then I run my start script to turn it on, and then wait a certain length of time for it to warm up and regulate, and at the end I would turn it off again. So
yeah,
I'll
it's
just
much like
OK.
SG Pro. SG Pro is based more or less on the ADU plus or minus whatever tolerance you want.
Okay, I might have a further tinker with that then to see whether I can either make my Maxim work, or I might start using Cyril or something else in order to just do the grunt work of getting the master, and then I can use the master in things like affinity. In theory, affinity generates its own as well, but it's a bit manual and a bit slow. But anyway, okay, so going back to where we were.
Excuse me, Mike, I'm sorry to cut in, but this is Pauline. Can I say that, being perfectly frank, a lot of the technical terminology has just gone over my head. But as a recently retired system administrator, it's been amazing how the functionality and the capability of this software. So it's been very interesting for me. And I'd like to say thank you for giving this demonstration. And I feel that you've got to a point now where you're talking about a lot of technical issues that I don't know about and don't understand. So I'd like to say thank you. and good night to you all. So I hope you sort of everyone else has sort of got some benefit out of this, because I found it really interesting. So thank you very much.
Pauline, quickly before
Yeah.
you go, something perhaps I should have mentioned at the start of this call was that we hope in May to have our first face-to-face practical session back at Clifton School. So look out for the email. I'll probably ask to. I'll try and get one out sort of just to let the society know that we hope to get back to face-to-face, and hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
You got any questions?
And for the next meeting, I'll try and get my camera working, and although it's not a pretty view, at least you'll be able to see my face. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Most
Thanks,
interesting.
Pauline.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
I guess that's a useful reminder, actually, that I have to be careful not to be too technical. But what?
Sorry, I'm still with you, Mike.
Excellent.
It isn't a reminder for you. Because you're presenting this and you're presenting to people who are familiar with the terminology. It's you can't cater for everyone's level of ability. So I think what you did was fine, because you're speaking to your colleagues who understand what you're saying. So
Well,
thank you again.
we don't all understand everything, I can assure you.
Well, I mean, this
we
is
just,
it.
we just look as if we do.
We should
Well,
call
on
out
that
everything we hear.
Yeah, on that note, and a cheerful note at that, I'm definitely leaving. So thanks very much. Bye.
Lovely, you're quite welcome.
Bye.
So I'm just I just clicked on the drag script to close everything down for the night, because it's looking a bit hazy and muggy out there. And this is where you've got the camera rotating with the dome, and
This is where you find out how close you get to that ladder.
the telescope's static, right? It's the world that's rotating around me.
It is very impressive, isn't it? Watching, your mount do stuff when you're away from it and panicking.
Yeah.
I've yet
Absolutely,
to do a Meridian flip on mine remotely. I just don't quite have the confidence.
What CE camera you're using in the dome?
It's a straight AliExpress infrared. Sorry, it's not an infrared. It's a it's a Wi-Fi IP camera, and it's one of the stock CCTV cameras that's got a Starlight sensor in it, but doesn't do a good job of accessing the Starlight capabilities.
It's got quite good. Have you got any actual lighting on in there, or is it just what the camera sees?
So I've turned on the flat field.
Ah, right.
So,
Okay, that's enough just to let it see.
Yeah. So it's got an IR mode and it's got a visual mode, and it flipped from visual into IR when the shutter closed. And if I turn the light off now, you can what you've got is what's left of the daylight.
Yep.
Coming through the panels that aren't painted.
Yep.
And if I turn it back on, we should get, there we go. It's so nice for these things to be controllable from the desk. Right, okay, so I'm going to put a pin in that for now, and I've just got a couple of slides left just to top and tail that conversation, if I can remember how to get out of it. So, right, okay, here we go. So we looked at the setup, we looked at the profiles, we looked at basically getting it to operate and the approach, which was solve, 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 and solve again, with its own built-in focus and guide engines. And we looked at some of the monitoring widgets, and then we looked at how you build up a sequence into a survey, and then had a quick look at auto-optimized flats, and the new capability, which is the auto sequencer, which is I think it's really insane, and it's not that other tools don't have one, because some of the older tools even have one. It's a question of having it built in with all the additional bells and whistles that something like SG Pro or Nina has as well. The web remote. I forgot about the web remote. Shall I give you a quick flick on the web remote? Anyone interested in that? Because it's quite funky.
Yes, why not?
Okay. This is where we show Bob to the world. Walk through Voyager, did it? That's nice. Voyager Web Dashboard. There we go. So Voyager Web Dashboard. This is it. I've clicked on it in my website and I've hit connect. And it says trying to connect. And from there, I can do pretty much, not entirely everything, but pretty much everything I could. I can select what profile I'm going to use. And then I can cause it to connect to that profile and start the all the attached services. And then I can actually do on-the-fly mount control, to use its terminology. And can then start some scripts, some interface and sensor type controls. But one of the real values of the web interface is that it supports the Mosaic Creation. And we've seen other tools do Mosaic Creation, but this one's fairly funky because well, this is where I found out every tool can do this, which is probably fair to say. But I can set that up, and what I can then do is directly import that through the CSV copy here into my Robo clip, and then I can treat it as a single sequence, so it'll just go away and blast that mosaic out, and carry on blasting out until it's finished. And I can specify the amount of overlap, and also my basic PA of the image. And if I picked a particular, it's not connected, so I won't do that. But I can also say, normally I'd do get telescope position, and it would pick up my current position and the object I'm currently looking at, and that would reflect on the screen current CCD camera resolution orientation. So at that point, I've got a really good idea what I'm looking at and how I'm looking at it. And then the rest is all about just observing. Latest image comes in the left-hand pane, the camera connection details and guide details in the middle, how well I'm progressing through my sequence, and some basic other information such as my focus. Sorry, I talked about auto guiding. That's not auto guiding. That's cooling and camera. That's auto guiding and half flux size, and the logs and rotator PA. And finally, I can update the sequences, specify a new sequence, and update the drag scripts and specify the drag script. So if I want to do on-the-fly changes during the night, I can just run it all through here pretty much without going into the remote desktop. And if I'm running numerous Voyagers across numerous other telescopes and mounts, I can do that all from here as well, just by picking a different port number up here out of the 4 or 5 that are available to me. And that's a quick saunter through the web dashboard. But I quite like it because you can just run it on your phone, but I don't suppose that's too much of a difference to lots of other applications. It does have a key dependency on that mosaic piece if you want to generate some mosaics, although you can still use Telescopium to do that and import it directly from Telescopium. Where am I up to? So that's the funky interface that I quite like. What else have we got? I think that's pretty much brings us to the end and say, look, well, what's the balance? On the upside, the user community consider it very reliable, and so does the author, which is hardly surprising. On the downside, I seem to break it fairly quickly. Because if you get to power something up, or if, say, the USB to a camera is not working and Maxim hangs, it can't handle it. And sometimes the only thing to do is kill the damn thing and start again. It's Windows only is a bit of a downside. It's also supposed to all run as admin, which is a bit of a security no-no. And actually, a lot of applications are now actively resisting being run as admin because of the security implications that you're not supposed to run outside the security sandbox of being a standard user. There are some slight author quirks. We talked about the color of the screens, some of the cover calibrator, in other words, the cover and the flat fielding intentions of use have been slightly, I'm going to say perverted, but misused. So sometimes he expects one of the in a cover calibrator, you typically have the means of opening your cover, like your Olnasak flip flap or something, and another setting would be to turn it on and off. But there's an intent, because one of the early adopters used it this way. Actually, that on and off is often expected to turn the lights for the dome on and off. So it's not as obvious, sorry, to use as you might think in some areas. But the web access, it runs unattended night after night. I can just run that script and walk away, and it'll start itself up and shut itself down. It's the only one I know of that supports 4 cameras. We haven't talked so much about the array mode, where you have a master and slaves, but I can run at least 2 instances of Voyager on my desktop on the one license, so I can at least carry on with 2 cameras, but there's no slaving. It's got that integrated scheduler, and the support is actually quite good. He will come back on WhatsApp within minutes. He will come back by Facebook and Twitter within minutes. And there's an entire forum and a wiki and a maintained useful help file. But some of it's in Italian and some of it's about video. But it's got quite a diverse community that use it. Come on. How are we doing? Okay, and this is how I use it. I have Maxim and Carte de Ciel as my planetarium, and I use PhD2 as my guider. Stacking is irrelevant because it's Voyager. Processing is irrelevant because Voyager doesn't do any processing whatsoever. And all my monitoring devices are pretty much Alpaca nowadays. So in other words, if you want ASCOM, it does it, and it doesn't even care that it's Alpaca, because ASCOM should be hiding that from it. Anything else? I think that's the end. That is the end. There you go. Click to exit. There we go. Done. So that is where we're up to. Hopefully that was a useful trip through Voyager. I apologize if it's taken a bit longer than you might have expected, but I do talk a lot.
No, it's excellent. Thank you, Mike.
That's very good. Tom.
Yeah, very comprehensive.
Who was it? It was Mr. Hyde. Is it Mr. Hyde that's say he uses it or starting to use it?
Jason, possibly.
Jason, there we go. Yes. I'll close that and I'll stop the sharing bit. But yes, I've got to the point where I'm quite happy with it, using it to open and close, as long as I haven't forgotten to put a blooming ladder out in the middle of the way. And I'll see if I can report back on it doing the complete automated thing. So I guess the key question is, how do we think it stacks up against its competition? I mean, we recognize what the competition is. It's Nina, it's SG Pro, it's possibly the Sky. We talked about CCD to CL the other day on WhatsApp. How do we think it stacks up against that? Are there sort of killer features, or are all the features from these different applications tending to converge? And so we should actually converge ourselves on freeware.
I think it sounds like it pretty much covers all the bases. It's just a different interface and a different, like you said at the beginning, a different mindset approach to how they've gone about putting it together.
I think the thing about Nina and the others was the dislike of paying for software on a subscription basis. You know, in the good old days, you bought your software, you owned it. So that's, I think, turning me off some of the likes of SG Pro, and so that's where I think Nina has a lot of benefits.
It's pretty much the same with the Sky as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think perhaps the major benefit that seems to come out of your presentation this evening is the reliability. You know, that once you've got your setup working, you should just be able to say, right, I want to do this, and just leave it to, you know, you might be busy at work all week, but when the safety conditions allow, everything just fires up and goes completing your sequence.
Did you say? I mean, did you say what cost it is?
I just paid 25 quid for this year's maintenance, and what I get out of that is continuous updates throughout the year, and I get instant support, and I also get remote support, by which I mean he'll actually connect in and help me drive it to debug a problem.
Right.
The
So
initial
I think
cost was about 100, you said, for the basics?
so the basic is about 100, 120, I think, yes. So that gives you the first year all in. And from then on, you'd be paying something like £25 a year for that level of support. And I think actually I've probably used that level of support, both because the range of hardware you're trying to bring together is probably that complex and that tweaky. Yeah, so it's mostly user in front of the terminal type errors as opposed to Voyager. There's nothing really Voyager error-y that's really come across, apart from learning some of the slight quirks like that dome delay. Has been really helpful, and everyone always has little questions about meridian flips, just getting that tuned and optimized. So yeah, I'm hoping for much better things, and I'm really looking. What's been really impressive, I think, is that we've been getting sort of weekly and sometimes even daily updates for the Robo target scheduling updates, and you just apply them and off you run. And actually, you can hardly. I'm not even sure I've been able to tell a difference in terms of reliability because they're all beta releases for nightly builds, and it's been really nice that actually I couldn't have told you the difference. I couldn't told you the difference between an alpha and a beta and a full-blown retail release. So I'm quite happy on that front. And then the next iteration will take me to, I'll start running, probably move up to an array of 3 because I think everyone can easily put 2 or 3 cameras on a telescope if you haven't got them already. But the value there is I can say, right, take me my pictures and it'll manage all the sequencing, dithering and optimizing through the 3 different scopes all at once. It's a long way, right? Because I've got to learn how to process in the between times. When I've got the factory, the data factory running, and then I have to learn to process properly.
Yeah, me too. I haven't done any processing now for years.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the really basic automated stuff that we can script really easily, but then it's the stuff that takes insight and artistry that about how to dodge it to the right level.
Well, that recent Messier marathon we did was the first bit of very basic processing I've done in such a long time. I need to go back and find my old notes, but it was fun, and I was very impressed, Keith, with some of those images you managed, just those 2 single-minute exposures that you stitched together.
Yeah, some of them came out all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was quite pleased. Not so good. I was out till late the other weekend we had a clear it, and it looks like the flats didn't work. I didn't spot that when I was taking them at 3 in the morning, you know.
That's the problem with a setup. You might have to strip down every time, isn't it?
I think it's, yes. I mean, it was more. I think it was more. Well, I don't really know what it was. I think it was an update of the software combined with 3 in the morning. Not, you know, it's supposed to be automatic, sending it off, and then the next day when you look for them and you think, well, why aren't they there? And didn't realise it hadn't taken them.
Or it's put them in a completely different folder and you haven't discovered them yet.
Yeah.
I think the update changed all the defaults. I don't think it read the default file because there were a couple of things early on in the evening with autofocus that I thought, that's a bit strange. Why isn't it doing that? And it didn't twig. So yeah, I got a whole load of data, got hours worth of data, a few hours worth of data, and no flat. So it, yeah, it processes interestingly, shall we say.
I just have to take some new ones.
Well, I'll heavily crop it to crop out all the donuts that are on it.
I should be able to just make some new ones.
Well, I can't do the flats, of course, because I break it down every night. So,
well, you know, if you think to do then is when you're taking a session is to write down what your focal position is. if you know what, if you're able.
Well, I know
to.
what the focal position is, but I don't know what the camera rotation it was. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Although
I probably do know what the camera.
You could get to that. You could get to that because if you
could get to
solve
that.
it, yeah,
But,
and set it up.
The thing to do, Keith, is to keep it clean, isn't it?
or check that it's taken them.
Make it clean. So run your flats at the start, not at the end.
I've never thought of that.
Then you'll always know you've got them, won't you?
That's a good tip, actually, Dave.
After midnight, then you forget to take the
really
lights.
Filthy, just get your blower out and give it a clean.
well, exactly. I did that. I did that early on when I borrowed the camera because I noticed there were some donuts, so I was blowing it to clean it before I did it. Because this time I just forgot. But I like the idea of taking the flats at the beginning.
Start with them. Start doing twilight. I mean, it's easy, isn't it? You can start from the start.
Good idea.
Then you know you've got them.
Well, I guess I was going to say that that's just the risk of having a situation where you're tearing down. That you're more likely to get dirt and dust in the system, whereas if you're fortunate enough to have a permanent setup.
How do you think I tear it down?
The hammer.
But I mean, the simple thing is like when you take the camera off, you always ensure the sensor's facing down, never pointing it up.
Yes. I mean, it was only a few donuts. In fact, I probably got an image of it if I could find it. But you know, and of course you just think, oh yeah, the flats will take those out, no problem. But when you don't have the flats, that's when you have the issues.
Presumably they'll all be. You've not got any filters in there, have you? So they'll all be on the. They'll all be on the window. I'd have thought.
Probably. Let me have a look. See if I can.
Your flat was miles away, isn't it?
Yeah, they're on the window. Yeah, they're definitely on the window because that's normally what I clean. Yeah, let me have a look and just see. How can I?
Sorry, John. I think I interrupted you. You were going to add something.
Yeah, I'm contemplating adding an extra feature to NSG that would be able to remove donuts. And the idea is as long as you've got one frame without the donuts, so perhaps you've done a meridian flip, so the donuts have shifted to the opposite side of the sky, you'd be able to put a little preview box around the donut and then ask NSG to do a much more detailed job of that small area. And I've got a demonstration where it does that to take out a donut, which you might be interested to see after this.
Yeah, definitely. So this was, if you can see that, there's one at the top there that.
That's the hamburger.
It's the hamburger, yes. In there that I've been trying to process. I crop that one out in my images. I can show you what I've got if I can escape out of that. How far I've sort of. Where is it? Because oh, it's in Cyril, not in. No, not that one. What the TIFF? Oh. So I'm not even tired, and I can't run it up.
I'm going to have to wander, chaps, I'm afraid. I've got guests this weekend, and this was a bit of a concession for me to give the talk in the way we expected to do it. So I'll have to wander, but I hope that was interesting and useful, and feel free to ask any questions later.
Mike, yeah.
Thanks very much,
Yes,
Mike.
very much,
Yes,
Mike.
thank you, Mike.
Cheers, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
And you're still recording, Bob. I don't know if you want to carry on recording.
I shall end the
All right.